Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. I'm your host, Life Coach Marina Young, and sitting in the guest chair today is Stephanie M. Hutchins. She is a PhD, and we are going to be talking on a topic, transforming your life after trauma. Welcome, Stephanie.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Myrna. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, really happy to have this conversation with you. Trauma is everywhere, and I've been having a lot of talk on this show on trauma, and that's because it comes to you from all sides. Childhood, adulthood, loss, grief, it's a subject that we can't even get enough of, because like Stephanie is going to put a different spin on it today, and she's going to be teaching you, or we're going to be talking about how to transform your life after trauma. Sometimes we think that when you experience trauma, then you should just, put a cover over your head and and stay depressed or something. Stephanie is going to actually, one of the questions she talks about is how to use that as your fire and as your fuel. So, all right, so stay tuned. We're going to have a really good conversation today. Now, let me give you a little more information on Stephanie. Stephanie M. Hutchins, PhD, is the author of Transformation After Trauma, Embracing Post-Traumatic Growth. She helps individuals overcome trauma and cope with stress. She's a certified life coach, stress management coach, neuro-linguistic programming instructor, and a yoga instructor. She also owns you see, I messed that up. Serotinous Life. Got it. A company that helps individuals overcome stressful and traumatic events. All right. Well, I know that a lot of times when we have a niche or there's something that we want to help others with, is because we've also gone through that path. And that is why God tags us to share our story so we can help others. So, Stephanie, can you share your trauma story and how you transform your life because of it?
Yeah, so I really enjoy having such an odd thing to say, enjoy having the opportunity to talk about my experiences, because people sometimes, especially when they're close to their pain, they think that I'm absolutely insane when I talk about post-traumatic growth and the fact that I have thrived not in spite of my trauma, but because of my trauma. And some people they just don't believe that it's possible, but I know that it is possible because I've experienced it in my own life. My traumas span a significant portion of my life, and just the summary version of it is that I was sexually violated by 8 different men between the ages of 9 and 19. And that doesn't count the time that I was attacked from behind at knife point, because I was able to get the knife away from my perpetrator and run away to safety. And then to top it all off, once I finally found a man who tried to show me that I was deserving of love and respect, a week and a half before I closed on the house we were going to move into and start our long life together, I found him dead. And just everything started to spiral out of control. And so I know that place of hopelessness. I know that place where you just can feel that life will never get any better, because I felt like that for a long time. And I spent many years of my life contemplating suicide, because I just never thought that life could get any better, but it has. And so I went from experiencing all of these, intensely traumatic events through a huge span of my life, to now having completed my PhD. I've traveled around the world. I have many loving relationships, and I am now able to use what I've learned in my own healing journey to help others, and I often reflect, what if I would, because a lot of people, like they do put that bag over their head and say, I've been marked, with the
Yeah,
bag,
yeah,
that trauma,
yes,
and now I'm forever tainted and my life will never be any better. But the reality is this is a very harsh world that we live in, and none of us will escape its wrath. We are not going to leave this earth untouched from trauma.
true,
And so
true,
if
true.
we hold on to that belief that we're forever marked and that we're forever going to suffer because of our trauma, then that means if our traumas, my trauma started at 9 years old, what if I live to be 90?
Yes,
That means that all of those years I'm going to suffer.
yes.
So I have refused to believe that something that happened to me at one point in my life has to dictate that the rest of my life will include suffering because of something that someone else did to me or something that was out of my control. And I refused to hold that as my belief. And
Wow.
I have now, I'm sure we could talk about this, but one of the biggest things that I've used to move forward is reframing, and which is just changing your perspective. And I looked at all that I've endured, and focused, instead of all that I've lost and all that would no longer be because of my trauma, I started to look at how strong I must be to have survived it all and to still be here.
Wow.
I started to focus on the empathy and compassion I've gained for others in pain because of my deep knowing of
Wow.
pain.
Wow.
And when I was able to start seeing the gifts behind my trauma, it changed everything for me. And that's why people don't understand why I chose this ridiculous word for my business name. My business name
Yeah.
is Serotinous Life, and people thought that was a really bad move, but it's very, very meaningful to me. See, I was
Mm,
a biology professor for 12 years, so I had to tie in a science concept with my business, but serotinous cones are pine cones that only open in response to, well, trauma. And the species will not experience growth without a trauma like fire. And the species would go extinct without it.
yeah. I've actually
Yeah.
heard of that. I actually have
Mhm.
heard of that. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm wearing short sleeves. Nobody can see my goosebumps, but your story really touched me. And and I have like goosebumps over it. I'm picking up on the energy. And it's really interesting that without even knowing it, you attract conversations to yourself. And a lot of times when I have a guest on the show, I can actually relate to something that they're saying. It's whether it's a book I read or a personal experience or something, but I can relate. And as you were talking about your sexual abuse, I was abused as a child just by one person. And when I wrote my book, I wrote a book out of the smears. We were very poor, and I was abused by a very wealthy man. And what I said is in my book is that even though I was abused, that I came out of that a better person. I came out of that a better person because he taught me a whole bunch of things about life and not living with a poverty mindset, which is something that as a coach you can understand. And I remember one person in my when I obviously it's on Amazon, and one person reviewed it and said that I possibly couldn't think that. And in order for me to be thinking that, she says that I had narcissistic tendencies. And I don't know. See, you're laughing. But I had dozens of reviews, but that one stayed with me because I had to think about it. Am I like a narcissist because I'm thinking that something so bad actually? So here you are saying exactly the same thing, and you and had it worse. So, were you in foster care or something, or in a group home, or expand on
No.
that for a little bit? Why that happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my parents divorced when I was young, and my mom was raising three little girls, and she was doing a very best she could, but I was the oldest, and I was in many ways responsible for taking care of my younger sisters, and we were able from a very young age to sort of just move around. We grew up in a very small rural town, which people associate small town with being safe, but actually it was in and around that small town where I was violated over and over again.
Mm.
And I, I think part of it was that I was able to move freely, quote unquote, throughout the world, and at a young age that I was I was able to be in situations over and over again where I was able to be victimized.
Okay.
And from a very young age, my family knew about my second abuser at 12. So my first one was at 9, and he was a family member.
Mm.
And because of that, that created a lot of conflict, and him saying you can't tell, and all these
Mhm.
kinds of things. But then at 12, I did tell, and because it was a small community, the local, like, judge and other people in the area, they said, we can prosecute, but it was also a family member, and they, then everybody would know. It's a small town,
Right,
and
right, right.
so it just ingrained in me. And then my third victimizer was a family member, and
Wow.
so over
Mhm.
and over, I was shown at a young age um, that I can't tell, and that I shouldn't tell because
Oh,
it's a small
right. Can't
town, and the
tell.
stigma.
Everybody's gonna know. Right,
Yeah,
right, right,
yes,
right.
yes. So I
Wow.
started just carrying all of my
Mm.
secrets with me.
Mhm.
And some people are shocked when they hear about how many people um hurt me, and then I didn't say.
Wow.
And I've actually been questioned, like, am I lying? Like, how could
Wow.
anybody be violated by that many men and not
Anything.
say
Right,
anything? but
right.
but they don't understand, like, all
Mm.
of the times, like, and then I was blamed, like, at 15, the mother of the one of my friends, her boyfriend and his friend violated me, and she blamed me. And I was
Wow.
15.
Wow.
When I was attacked from
Yeah.
behind at knife point at 16, I was blamed because of what I was wearing.
Very. Yes. Wow.
So
Wow.
all of these messages, I was told over and over again that that was my cross to
Well,
bear, that I
yes,
had to
yes.
carry that burden.
Yeah.
And and so and what's really interesting is that I also get, when I start talking about, post-traumatic growth, because that's really my mission, is spreading this idea that our traumas don't have to destroy us, okay, that they can
Mhm.
actually be used to fuel us into a life that we actually couldn't have previously imagined prior to our pain. And some people think that I am, like, grateful for experiencing so much pain, like I'm actually grateful that I was hurt. But I think what people, and I actually, on my social media, sometimes will get angry faces on my posts
Mm.
about post-traumatic growth. On my
Mm.
YouTube videos, I'll get people disliking them.
Mm.
and
Mhm.
and I and it's these people that don't believe that it's possible.
Yes.
But what I have to ask people is, like, what is more useful? Okay. Is it more useful to carry throughout my life this idea that my traumas have forever destroyed me and that I'll never heal? If I'm going to live for decades more after my trauma, it's not useful to
Right.
just think of how it destroyed me. It's not
Yes.
going to allow me to be successful in any aspect of my life.
Right.
So I have to shift how I look at my experiences so that they don't hold me back. And so
Right.
what I've done is shift from a mindset. So you're probably, as a coach, familiar with NLP, and in neuro
Right.
linguistic programming, we're all
Mm.
about shifting people from an unresourceful state where they don't feel they have options to a resourceful state where they do feel they have options. And when I was focused on all that I lost and all that would no longer be because of my trauma, I was
Mm.
bulimic, I was
Yes.
promiscuous, I was sleeping with strangers, having unprotected
Yes.
sex, and I wanted to
Yes.
die every single day of my life. So it
Yes.
was not useful for
No.
me
No.
to think about all that my trauma did to hurt me,
Right.
how it's held me back. But once I was able to shift how I thought about my traumas, it shifted me into a resourceful state. It made me feel as that I had options for
Okay.
moving forward.
So how did you reframe
Mhm.
being violated by 9 men to make it useful for you?
So there were a number of factors that were at play here. So my significant other that died, his name was Stan, and right before he died, I hadn't talked about any of my traumas when I was a child. I didn't start talking about them until my mid-20s, and I started talking about them a few months before he died, and so I
Mhm.
was like reliving memories
Mhm.
from a past that I had locked up tight.
Right.
And then 2 weeks after I started seeing a psychiatrist and talking about them, his mother died. I watched her die from terminal cancer. And then two
Mm.
weeks after that, I found him dead. And
Wow.
so and then I moved into a house we were supposed to move into together. So what happened is I was reliving immense pain from my
Yes.
past and
Yes.
now living
Yes.
through immense pain in my present
Be
life.
present.
And
Right.
I just was
Wow.
falling apart. So I couldn't
Wow.
work for a period of time. I
Wow.
put on an immense amount of weight. I was not bathing. I was not brushing my teeth. I wasn't leaving my house for days. And
So
and
full depression.
oh, it was very, very
Yes.
severe.
Yes. Right.
And
Mhm.
and what happened is it was actually my mother. So my mother and I have a very special relationship. And she was helping me financially
Mhm.
in the beginning, but then she saw that it wasn't helping and I was actually
Right.
getting worse. And she gave me
Mhm.
an ultimatum. She says, unless you start getting help, I cannot continue to support you financially.
Financially. Right.
And that caused me to really look at the way that I was currently experiencing life. And I saw that I had two choices. I could either go down the path I was currently on, which was going to lead to my death, because
Yes.
I was putting myself in harmful situations or I was going to end it all,
Yes.
or I could move forward. And I decided to move forward, but I had to be like, what do to do now that I've decided to move forward?
Mhm.
Okay. So the first thing I had to do was I started setting up little goals like, okay, if this is how I'm currently experiencing life and I want to move forward, that means I have to change what I'm currently doing.
Mhm.
And I could have gone and said, well, I need to find a job, but I couldn't go to that point yet. I wasn't even like leaving my house and bathing. So the
Right.
first thing I had to do is I had to start taking care of my body in my home. So I would
Mhm.
write little goals down for myself each day. And I would write, take a shower, brush my teeth, take out the
Mhm.
trash. Like these are things I would write.
Mhm.
And then what happened is after days and weeks of doing this, I didn't need to keep writing it down anymore
Right.
because it
Right.
was part of my routine.
Right.
And as I started to do these things, I started to feel better.
Better.
I
Yes.
started to
Yes.
feel worthy of moving
Mhm.
forward, and I was able to start applying for jobs. And what happened though is I still needed to lose weight. I had put on a lot of weight in a short period of time.
So
And
you're using food as your comfort, obviously.
absolutely,
Right. Okay.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
so I knew that I wouldn't just change my eating patterns because it was good for me. Like that's not something I would do. And I wouldn't just exercise because it was
It's
good
good
for
for you.
me.
Yeah,
Like
because
because
you weren't in that place. Right.
that's
Yes.
not where I
Yes.
was
Yes.
at that
Right.
point.
Mhm.
But I've always turned I've always loved exercise, and maybe we could talk about this another point because I understand today why my body was desiring movement.
Right.
Because I taught anatomy and physio, I taught about the human body for years.
Wow.
So I
Yes.
understand on a
Mm.
level now why my body always turned to physical activity. But
Mm.
what I did is to lose weight, I started to look for meetup groups where I could be active. And I
Okay.
started to find a number of hiking groups. And here
Okay.
I was morbidly obese. Like I was morbidly obese. I wasn't exercising at all for a few years up to that point. So like every single hill I climbed felt like as big as Mount Everest. And so like I just felt like I was going to
Yeah.
die every
Yeah.
single time I was climbing just a little hill. But something amazing happened each time I
Yes.
went out there is I started to see that as I continued to push myself. So like each week I started going out and I kept going for these walks and little hikes. I started to get stronger. I could feel it that I could go a little faster. I could see the weight was starting to come off. And then I started to hike little hills and bigger mountains. And it was hard. But what I started to see is that even though it was hard, I could do it. And that as I pushed myself, I got stronger. And I started to reflect on how this could be applied to my experiences in life. If here physically, I was pushing myself and I was getting stronger, I started to look at how strong I must be to have survived all that I endured.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so not only did I
Yes.
teach about the human body for years, but I also studied it as years prior to teaching. And I started to look for evidence in nature and in our bodies of how we get stronger in response to stress. You
Yes.
know, our
One of the
bones grow.
ones I was just about to say that when you
Yeah.
break a bone, it grows back
Yes.
stronger.
It absolutely does. It
Yes.
absolutely
Yes.
does.
Yes.
Our
True.
muscles, in order for our muscles to
That's
grow,
right.
they
You
have to
got to tear them
experience
down. Right.
you have to
Right.
tear
Tear
them.
them down. Right. Right. Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes. Like
Right.
in
That's pretty
all of
good.
these,
Mhm.
yes, yes. So
Yes.
all of
Yes.
these examples in life of where
Yes.
immense stress causes immense growth.
Right.
And if it can be applied in one aspect of a life, and then you can start seeing across multiple aspects, it must be applicable to you as well
Yes.
as an
Yes.
individual. And I started to see that it was true. And
Mhm.
it just fueled me to say, like, okay, what can I do? Like I started to set like bigger goals for myself and realizing like I could accomplish literally anything I set my mind to. And it got me excited, like really
Did you
excited.
ever hike a mountain? Like you
Oh
got rid of that
yeah.
hill?
Yes,
So
yes. So
that's the progression, right? Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I
Yes.
started
Okay.
traveling around the world and climbing huge mountains, literally.
Good for you. Good for you. That's how it starts. That's how it starts.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's very interesting. What you're saying a minute ago, I need to reflect on that for a minute. But what you're saying, that you knew that you were not in a place where you would try to lose weight or try to watch what you eat, but you were in a place to walk and hike hills. It's amazing how we reframe things, because most people in that state, if they can't make themselves not go to the fridge and eat ice cream, or do anything or whatever, they're not going to make the harder choice to go up and walk hills and hike. So it's very interesting that and I think, and then obviously we all know what happened with your emotions, that when you're outside, nature does something to you, and that's why you started feeling good, because it's a healer. Wow, that is a great story. Great story. And
I think
you're
I'd just like
correct.
to
Yes.
I'd like to just add in there about like, because I think part of why I was able to make that in many ways what it appears to be a leap from, like here, not, like being morbidly obese and not wanting to take care of myself, but being willing to go and hike. It's
Yeah.
because I didn't associate it necessarily with my health. I divorced the two. Like I just treated it as its own separate goal. Like this is something I like. So I have always like to like focus on things, and it's allowed me to, I guess, in many ways serve as a distraction from what I'm experiencing. So for me, it was very instinctual to put my sights on a goal that was divorced from my pain.
Mm,
And so I didn't associate the mountains with being in the hills, with being part of my
healthy.
healing journey. Right. I didn't associate it with that. I associated it with a
Wow.
goal. Like,
That is interesting. Yeah, because I know that when you're mentally in that place, I'm not gonna, people don't even want to go outside and walk outside their door, or much less go hiking. So I understand what you're saying. But the fact is that you did, and it transformed you. And we're going to use that word a lot. We're using that transformation. That's what transformed you. That was the first step. And now look where you are. I mean, I'm positive you started to feel better. Then, looking after yourself wasn't a big issue because you started to feel better. You're no longer in the cobwebs and the fog and in the darkness. There's light through the tunnel, and you actually definitely, post-traumatic growth. Yeah. So, and I also want to circle back to something that you said, because it's really, really interesting that it happens. A lot of people experience trauma in their childhood, or I don't know, years ago. I mean, you could be talking, like you talk about somebody in their 90s. You could be talking to somebody in their 80s, and their 90s or 70s or whatever, and they will still be crying and feeling the emotion of something that happened 30, 40 years ago. And that's because they haven't dealt with it. Every time it comes up, they probably stuff it down or whatever. And what you said is correct. Why would you let that ruin your life? Because when you're in that place, and one of the things, as coaches, we know that when you're in that place, you have the negative emotions, you're blaming somebody, you become a victim. Again, when I wrote my book, I coined a phrase is, do not be a victim, be a player. Deal with the hands that you've been given. It's one of the things that that came out of, that I heard and I embraced, right? So here you are with the same thing. A whole bunch of bad things happen to you, but you use that as like when you're playing the card game, 21, you've got some 2s and 3s showing, and you need you play with the cards that you've been given. And so one way to do that is to, like you talked about, reframing it, talking about, what was the lesson in, what can you, so yeah, so basically, the transformation is what you're talking about. What was the lesson in that? And in order for you to learn the lesson, right, then you use that to have growth. So pretty good. Excellent conversation. Excellent conversation. Now, you also said that that when people experience trauma, they acquire some negative coping mechanisms, and you help them replace the negative coping mechanisms with positive coping strategies. And I'm almost sure that you're going to be talking about, I think one, I'm not sure if reframing is one of them, but can you give us an example of replacing a negative coping strategy with a positive one?
yeah. And I guess first I would like to address reframing, because I used reframing in my healing before I even knew it was a technique,
Right.
and and I'll have to say that as far as coping mechanisms, when I'm working with people, the first thing I want them to do is I want to help them reframe how they look at their coping mechanisms, so they don't see them, because a lot of people are very ashamed of what they've done after to just survive, and what I have people start to look at is to look at what they've done to cope, their quote unquote negative coping mechanisms, instead of looking at them with shame and disgust, looking at them with, in many ways, gratitude for all the ways they kept you alive. And they were just helping you to survive in a very painful existence. See, what trauma the unifying, theme with all traumas is that it overwhelms our capacity to cope. And so in the aftermath of trauma, we hold on to anything that gives us even a moment's relief from our pain, or gives us a moment's distraction from the painful memories. And so if it worked, even for a moment, we hold on to it. And sometimes we hold on to things that from the outsiders are perceived as very negative, like food, alcohol, sex, drugs, okay, cutting yourself. But you have to I have people, they need to understand. So anyone who's listening, if you have any of these coping strategies that people may consider, and even you yourself may consider to be negative, I think the first thing you need to look at is understanding is how they're serving you, and releasing some of the shame and guilt you have for acquiring that habit in the first place. Because take all the things I just listed, cutting yourself, eating, drinking, sex, all of these things, what they do is they change the chemistry of our brain, every single one of them. Every single one of those activities released a whole host of feel-good neurotransmitters in the brain that light up our brain and make us feel good. And so it is no wonder that we turn to them when we're in pain, because they make us feel better. And so the first thing we need to do is stop looking at all these things that we've done in an effort to survive with so much pain and sadness. And so that requires a reframe. It requires looking at that differently, and then understanding that, okay, even though that behavior may have served you up through this period of time and it's been beneficial, it may no longer be serving you as well. Okay. Because there becomes a point that we practice behavior so often that they become automatic, and we do it long after it's used. It's because useful.
Then you have addiction. That's how it
right,
comes.
Right. And so we could have addictions of all sorts of things, and so what in order to begin replacing, see, this is the thing that people need to understand. Like, you don't just stop, doing something that's not like that. You don't just stop overeating. You don't just stop, drinking and using drugs and all of these things. What you do is you need to replace them. Why do people who stop using drugs and drinking alcohol turn to cigarettes and sugar? They're doing it because they're replacing it. Those same, but they're not realizing it. They're replacing it. So nobody just stops a bad habit. You have to replace it. And so if you are looking yourself to stop a bad habit, you need to look at, okay, what are you gaining from it? Okay. And so so there's usually one of two things. We're driven by a desire to seek pleasure or avoid pain.
Right.
Yes. So it's one of those things. So I really encourage anyone who has habits they're trying to release is to first look at, when are you triggered to engage in these habits? Is it a certain time of day? Is it being around certain people? Is it when certain feelings or sensations come up in your body? And realizing your trigger. Don't get stuck on why you have the habit. I don't think it's useful to focus on the why. You can't do anything with the why. But once you identify what the trigger is, you can determine ahead of time what you can do instead the next time you're triggered. You can avoid the trigger. Okay. So like if a certain time of day, like at work, or certain people trigger you to want to smoke or eat sweets or whatever it is, or people in your home life, can you change that interaction, minimize the interaction, do things to avoid certain interactions. But let's say you are triggered. It's important to have ideas in place ahead of time for what can you do if you actually want to start engaging in the habit. So like if you want to have a cigarette, maybe if you get feel that desire to have a cigarette, could you sit back and do a minute or two of deep belly breathing exercises?
Right, right, right.
If you want to overeat, instead of reaching for the candy or whatever it is, can you go for a walk, for 5 minutes, doing something else that will replace that. And I think it's important for people to understand that there are a lot of things that will elicit the same chemicals in the brain. Physical activity will elicit a release of feel-good neurotransmitters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Laughing.
Yes.
Laughing is amazing. So like what I encourage people to do all the time is to use their technology, their phone. And so like what I've done on YouTube is I have different folders in my YouTube app that are for different emotions I want to elicit or different feelings. So if I want to feel empowerment, I have a folder for that. If I want to sing and dance, I have a folder for that. If I want to laugh, I have videos that make me laugh. And I have also in my photos, folders of pictures that will make me laugh. And so I encourage people to develop these tools ahead of time, because in the moment, it's not going to default to go to, I need to search YouTube for things that'll make me laugh.
It's just like you can't learn to swim when you're drowning. Yes.
Right.
Yes, you gotta be prepared and do those things. But also one of the other things that I just want to mention here is that once your awareness is also very important. Once you are aware of what triggers you, and once you're aware of how you react to the trigger, awareness is really, really big. And we all go through life, just being automatic and letting our subconscious run us. But as soon as we put consciousness in it, and as soon as we become to be aware, things started that thing stops its hold on you. So that's Absolutely. Pretty good. Yeah.
I use that word awareness. Bring your awareness to. I have this coaching program I do. I must say it in each module like 4 times. And I'm like, I know I've said it a million times, but awareness is the key to change. You cannot change something unless you are first aware that it's a problem.
Yep. It's very, very true. And the crazy thing about how we're wired in science is that as soon as you're aware of it, it stopped. It's you made the first step to solving it or having it take away its hold from you, because it's like the invasion of the body snatchers. You know what I mean? Once it invades you and you're just automatic, but as soon as you're aware that it's there, right, then a whole bunch of psychological things start happening. So that's good. I love it. All right. So I love this question that I have here. Now, you tell your clients to not let the fires from their past destroy them, but actually use it as the fuel for growth and transformation. So share with us that, how does trauma provide the fuel for growth? And now we're very, I'm not sure what the word is, but we are very engaged in your story. So use your story as an example, because it's a really powerful story, right?
Yeah, so I, and I love reframing. I've already brought it up now. This is like the 4th time, but
it's like your awareness word.
Yeah, I do. I love it, and it's been so important to me in my healing. And see, I had to, in order to move forward, I could not look at, again, all of the devastation that was left behind from the fires from my past. I couldn't. I would not be able to move forward with that focus. So, and again, I instead looked at the strength that I acquired. And so that's one of the very first things I have my client do when we get to the reframing. I have different steps in my programming. When we get to the reframing stage, the first thing that we always have to look at is reframing the trauma itself and reframing the meaning behind it and what it's meant for your life. And instead of looking at so I encourage the client to always look at, instead of looking at what they've lost from their trauma and what would no longer be, looking at what they've gained. And depending on how recent the trauma is, it might not be accessible to them in the moment to think about what they've already gained, but what they could gain from their trauma.
I remember a very powerful story that I heard. There was this girl that was walking to school. She was like 11 or something, and she was raped, right? And a therapist was actually, the therapist had a show, and she was actually showing how she can heal somebody in like 10 sessions, where a normal therapist takes like 20 years or something. And she showed, they recorded the episodes. And of course, it's almost one of the same things that you're talking about. This thing happened to this girl when she was 11, she's in her 40s now, and she carries that around. But one of the things that I always remembered about that episode is that the therapist asked her, obviously she felt that she shouldn't have been walking through there because her mother told her not to walk. She was taking a shortcut, and her mother, and then when the guy called her, she shouldn't have gone, and all these things play in her head. But one of the things the therapist said is, how do you feel? Just like you said, what do you feel was the reason that you're telling yourself that it happened? And it's the story that you're telling yourself is much more important than the actual facts. So that's, so I had to interrupt you. So that's basically what you're saying. Yeah, how do you feel about it personally, about what happened? Well, you have blame, you have, whatever. So keep going. Yes.
And I think that's very important. And I always encourage that is this is what reframing is about, is changing the narrative, changing the story and the meaning you have behind your trauma. If you associate your trauma only with devastation, you are not going to let it go because you don't see any hope for moving forward. So it's about changing that narrative. And so you can see what's possible. And I understand that it's not always easy. And this is why I'll have to say that one of the most important things I could have done for myself, and I encourage every single one of my clients to do now to help shift that belief of what's possible, is listening to the stories of others. You have to, if you cannot see it within yourself to be able to shift the narrative and the meaning behind your trauma, you have to see what's possible by listening to the stories of other people. So what I started to do is I listened to YouTube videos and podcasts and read books on people that had immensely hard experiences of life and saw that they came out on the other side stronger than ever before. And once I saw that it was possible for somebody else, I knew it was possible for me too. And as I kept listening to story after story, I had to say that this person was not special because all of these people did it. They all came.
That's why you have to share. Your story has no power if you keep it in yourself. You've got to share it in however way you choose. Yes. And it does help others. Yes.
And I think that each time we share even our own story, it even starts to shift our story in our own mind, and it releases its hold. It's almost by saying it out loud, we're releasing all that, and it just becomes just a story. You've
got to talk about it. You talk about not talking about your trauma and your violation until in your mid-20s. I didn't start talking about mine until my 40s. And I understand that that's an actual data that shows that people don't start talking about it until their 40s and their 50s, because you attach shame to it and you don't want to talk about it. And now, once the first couple of times I started talking about it, it was really painful, or, the shame. But after that, it doesn't do anything. Just like you. I mean, I don't see any kind of you're not crying, you're not, you know what I mean? It's all gone. You actually have released it, right? You're actually energized sharing your story. So it's amazing. And I'm pretty sure it's because, like you said, you talked about it, you've processed, you've gone through. So yeah, wow, this was a powerful interview. All right, so we get to the point now where we talk about your book. It's called Transformation After Trauma: Embracing Post-Traumatic Growth. So you are a life coach, you're yoga, which is basically you're looking for the peace. You are a neurolinguistic programmer. You're a stress management coach. You're in the space. So, why did you write the book? What do you hope that people will take away from after reading the book? And yeah, was the purpose? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think my major mission was to give hope, for all of, I just felt that I was alone in this world for so long, that I just felt that something must be terribly wrong with me to experience so much pain, and that I felt that just so alone, that nobody understood me. And so in my book, I was very vulnerable about sharing my story and the coping mechanisms I used that used to bring me a lot of shame when I thought about them. And I was very open about them. And I get a lot of thank yous from people for me sharing my vulnerability and for making them feel like they're not alone. And so one of my missions was to make people feel like they're not on an island all by themselves with their suffering, and also for them to know that the pain can and will end.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did in the book was give my story, but I also it's mostly a tool-based book. So I
Mm-hmm.
incorporated all the tools that I used through my healing journey, particularly my self-care
Mm-hmm.
practices. And so it's all about giving actionable tools to not only align with the hope to help them, so keep that glimmer of hope alive while they're doing things that will help build that belief along the way that it's possible for them to emerge from the darkness of their pain even stronger than they were before. And yeah, so it's about hope.
It's amazing. My book is subtitled Hope and Encouragement as well.
Yeah.
So hey, it's a powerful thing.
Mhm.
It's a powerful thing. Yeah, hope. All right. So how can listeners and those watching in TV connect with you? Get a copy of your book. I'm sure your book is on Amazon and all
Mhm.
the places where books are sold. But what is your website? What is your social media handles, and how do people connect with you?
Okay, so yeah, Amazon has all three different formats in my book,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can type in "transformation after trauma" and then it'll come up.
Mm-hmm.
And my website is serotinuslife.com, and serotinus, I know that crazy word, is SEROTINOUS, so serotinuslife.com. But
Okay.
Facebook is my most used social
Mm-hmm.
media. So I do have my handle at Serotinus Life, but you can also
Okay.
just type in my name, Stephanie M. Hutchins, PhD, and
Okay.
I'll come up in search engines and all sorts of
Okay.
things. So there's lots of ways to connect with me. If you don't know how to spell the crazy name of my business, it's okay.
I know, full disclosure. Stephanie had to tell me how to say the thing, and then I still messed it up.
It's not easy. I get it.
But names have a purpose, names have a
Yes.
meaning, and
Yes.
I love that you pick that because it
Mhm.
means, fire makes you grow. You can't grow
Mhm.
without it. In fact, that's
Yes.
basically what it means. So
Yes. Yes.
so that's amazing. All right, this has been a very, very pleasurable interview, Stephanie. Like I told you, I speak about trauma a lot, but yours had a twist to it that was beautiful, and I loved it. And of course, your story give me goosebumps, when you were sharing it. So, I felt the energy. Now, a transcript of our conversation will be on the show page, which is blog.myhelps.us. And, if you guys don't know how to spell the name of her company, or you missed it, don't worry about it. There will be links on the show page to Stephanie's website and also to her book. So you can head over there and, listen to, re-listen to the podcast or, read the transcript of it. So, because she shared a lot of really good nuggets. And, you started off by saying that none of us go through life without being hit with something, right? None of us go through life where it is just roses all the time. I think there's a scripture in the Bible that says, is not if trouble comes, but when it comes. Do you know what I mean? So it's going to come. So, Steffi give us the hope that, when we go through something, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And the first step is reframing it and figuring out that you were strong enough to survive it. Something else that the Bible says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or is that old wives' tale? Yeah, my grandmother used to say that all the time. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that's it. So, Stephanie, thank you very much. It was a beautiful, beautiful conversation that we had. Good luck on your book, and good luck in your business. And thank you for coming on the show. So we're almost fresh out of time. And so any last words, Stephanie, before we wrap up?
Well, first, thanks you for having me. And I just, for your listeners, I just encourage you along the way to be patient with yourself, and healing is not a linear process. You're going to step backwards and you're going to move sideways and you're going to get bumps and bruises. And that's okay. It's part of the process. And just remind yourself you're doing the very best you can in every single day to survive. And tomorrow's a new day to start over.
Yes.
If you had a hard day, just focus on the next, and every day is a new beginning.
Okay. Awesome. Great advice. Yes. Take it one day at a time. Take it one day at a time. All right, guys. Well, listen, thank you for tuning in to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. This was an amazing interview on transformation, smack of what we do here. So what I would like to ask you to do, if you're listening to this on iTunes, definitely please rate and review so that I can keep bringing you fabulous guests like Stephanie, and so that the show can reach a wider audience. So thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, blessings.